English, the Antirasiskt Healthcare Manifest, and you can present yourself.
We're gonna have. So hi everyone, and warm welcome to this discussion around the documentary Exposed and the Anti-Racist Healthcare Service, a Manifesto for Change. My name is Paula Molinari. I'm sitting the editorial for an anti-racist journal, and I work at the university here. And with me today, actually, I didn't think that we will have live people from the documentary, but now we have. And so we have Esther and Felicia and Natisa and Naomi and from England, and then we have Simon. There are many names too. And Nandi from Sweden, from Malmö. Yes, okay. So we have 45 minutes, and we are a lot of people here, and I guess you have some questions too. But we'll be standing here for 45 minutes, so if everyone gets tired, you can sit down. But I have some questions I have prepared, so you just grab the mic when you want. One of the questions when I was watching the movie is, I guess, what you can call like a racial workplace. Everyone has to be quiet. I speak loud, but so one of the questions when I was watching this fantastic documentary, I said maybe you can call it like a workplace racial geography, whereby Black nurses and brown are on the one side overexposed, not only to the public but to races, and on the other side undervalued and underprotected throughout. And one of the things that struck me when I was watching the movie was that many of you spoke that you felt shame or that you were paranoid, that you had all these feelings before you named it. Like, no, but this is racist. So my first question is, how did you go from a place of shame and to a place of struggle? How do you create that transformation? So
I think as a black and brown person, you carry your heritage with you. You carry your race with you all the time. Yeah, and you carry your race with you all the time. We had never ever seen something like this before. The amount of deaths of nurses and midwives and other healthcare workers, and in particular, the death and infection rate amongst Black and brown people was high in the communities, in the general communities, and then in the nursing and midwifery and healthcare worker communities. So there comes a time when enough is enough. There comes a time when, some things may have been accepted before, but because this is just so unique and never occurred before, it's a time for your voice to be lifted. And you have to lift your voice with impact, and you have to turn your voice and your protest into action. So that manifested itself in many ways. There is, when these situations happen, you become unified. So you come together as a collaborative, you work together, and often, sometimes when the voice of protest, and when you're protesting in some of our circles, sometimes there's a price. The price may be that you get bullied or harassed, or life can be difficult in your lived and worked experience. But I think in this situation, there was great unity, great collaboration, and we spoke up. We spoke up quite vociferously. There were lots of we call them diaspora nursing midwifery organizations that were quite quiet before the pandemic. And during the pandemic, the voices were really lifted around the conditions and what was happening to nurses and midwives. So it was a time of like a revolution. So we were saying very clearly, this can't happen again. We were saying, what are you doing to safeguard nurses and midwives and other healthcare workers? So that was the beginning. And some of us set up organizations. So that's the kind of starting from not a negative position, but from how you turn the struggle into positivity. So we set up organizations, we wrote documents, we wrote to the government, we wrote to our chief nurse. So that's how we turn that struggle into some positive action. And then, so there's something about speaking with impact, there's something about turning your struggle into positivity, and then you need to be on it. So you have to hold the system to account, and you have to keep on protesting until things shift. And we're still doing that today. It's not a done deal because we've spoken up once. We have to continue to do that.
It was so eloquent, and and I was wondering in relation to we were speaking before, when you watch the documentary, does it reflect your experiences from the Swedish setting?
Yes, we do have racism within the healthcare. The problem is that we don't acknowledge that we have racism in Sweden. We don't collect data as you do in Great Britain and America. So we don't know, we don't have the right strategies to address racism and to work for more inclusivity and diversity and equality.
I agree with what you said. What stood out to me in the film was, and what I could relate to, is that this feeling of feeling lonely in your experience, and that you've created community, which we don't have. We don't have community. We're not that many Black and brown bodies in healthcare to have organized in that sense, but the issues are still there, and I guess that's also why we're here, and we try to amplify those experiences as well. Yeah.
Okay, actually, when I was watching the movie, I thought of there's this quote of Frantz Fanon when he says, "When we revolt, it's not because of a particular culture, we revolt because simply for many reasons we can no longer breathe." And I think that in many ways the quote echoes both, of course, the pandemic, also the murder of George Floyd. That is an issue that you bring up in the movie. And one of the questions, I love the documentary because it both gives like a historical context to the racialized healthcare industry. And my question was how important was the BLM movement in terms of also creating an impact among healthcare workers? How the social movements interconnect?
So everyone saw what happened with George Floyd's murder. It took me quite some time to even look at the video, but it was for the first time in my nursing career, so that's 15 years in, that suddenly we're talking more openly about racism. We're now talking more about how Black women are more likely to die in the healthcare. We're talking about how Black people are more likely to be detained in police custody rather than be supported in mental health struggle. These conversations, if you asked me 4 or 5 years ago, that would not be something that I would even talk about. You see it, and you know you'll try and do something to help that patient, because you know sometimes the people you work with are not perceptive to racism, and you know a lot of Black colleagues will look at each other and it's just a look. You don't even need to say anything, but you know that certain patients are getting very poor treatment because of the colour of their skin. When the movement happened, more and more people began talking, and then we had our union bodies starting to talk about it. We had our regulatory bodies, so that's the Nurse and Midwifery Council. We had NHS bodies, they were talking about it, and this is something that none of us had ever seen ever in our careers. I mean, I've only been doing it 15 years, but you've got people that have been doing it longer, and these are not something that they had in conversations, and that's where it started.
For my actual journey to setting up my organisation, Equality for Black Nurses. Hello. Yeah. So my journey into being part of the film and becoming an activist started when so in London they have this thing called stop and search, and they just randomly, the police just randomly stop and search people. There doesn't even need to be a suspicion, but there was one evening I'd been working as a nurse, and I was sitting in my car outside my house, and the police approached me. There was about 7 of them, and within the space of about 3 minutes, they accused me of having stolen goods, illegal weapons, and a whole load of other stuff. And because I know how the police treat my community, I was really frightened. But what it was is that fear made them suspect me even more. And then they searched my car. All they found was like nursing equipment. I had nothing illegal. I didn't do anything, but I challenged the police officer and said, "You've profiled me." And just that statement there, I ended up me being arrested. And then they took me to the police station and locked me up for 19 hours in a cell for nothing. But then they continued, and I ended up going to court and being found guilty for obstruction because they said it took me too long. But I think up until that moment, I didn't really, I knew there was racism, but it didn't really hit me the way that hit me, because it was just so, it was so bad. But it took me 14 months to clear my name. And it just coincidentally, I cleared my name on the 23rd of May, 2020. And then George Floyd was murdered like 2 days later. So then it started the conversation, and that's when I started to speak out about my experience, because like talking about the shame of it, as a nurse, any healthcare professional, you know, you can't be arrested, you can't have any involvement with the police. So having this tarnish, it was really embarrassing. I actually, like, even the fact that I'm speaking here about it now, it wasn't something I could talk about, because some people would think, oh, there's no smoke without fire. So I was constantly, but now with the George Floyd and the Black Lives Movement, it enabled me to start speaking out. So I did a lot of protests at the time in the UK. And then obviously because being a nurse, I then went back into my nursing role, and then I started to see parallels and similarities with how Black nurses are accused of things. So when my name was cleared, it went to a court, and the court said it was marked as no evidence. So there'd been no evidence, but they still managed to convict me. And it was a similar picture within the NHS, where nurses, and you know, and they're protesting, they're trying to say, you know, I haven't done anything, but nobody believes them. So that's when I set up Equality for Black Nurses, and now we support nurses going through discrimination, and we give them the voice, and I've created a platform where they can talk about their experiences. So that's how I was inspired by the Black Lives Movement.
I think that. But so you can see like parallels how patients and nurses are treated, yeah, and how people are so exposed to death to a.
Yeah, I think what I see as well, there's so much negative association based on the colour of someone's skin. So it's a stereotype. So people feed into this stereotype. You know, we get nurses coming to our organisation where they're accused of stealing things when they're not actually at work on those particular days. But you know, things like that. It's just changing, like, and challenging the stereotypes and kind of. Obviously, in the UK, we use we don't really like to go down civil action, but we do try and resolve things at employment level. Yeah.
So one question I had, because you said you've been working, many of you have like I don't remember the years, but many years in the healthcare system. And you said that this was the first time. Do you think it's more difficult to organize around issues of racism when it comes to the healthcare system, both in England and Sweden, than in other sectors, like say in conflict with the police or in other parts of the labor market, just because you have to have this vision that everyone is treated equally when you go to? Is it more difficult to combat racism when it comes in the healthcare industry, do you think, than in other sectors of the labor market?
I think it's the same. And when you are a nurse or a doctor or a healthcare profession, you are you can be how do you say discriminated and being a patient who doesn't want to be treated by you because the color of your skin. So we deal with racism from the patient and from our colleagues or our the staff from higher positions. So we are very vulnerable when we are there every day working. So it is very tough. And we've been talking regarding to George Floyd, that inspired me is I started my own platform that I mentioned earlier called Min Melanin Instagram, that I share about the racism we have in healthcare in Sweden and also the lack of knowledge we have when it comes to black skin. There is underrepresentation in medical books, medical literature, and so the underrepresentation and the not inclusivity we have. So we deal with racism, but we have patients that dies because of lack of knowledge, because of we have the structural racism. And so we have a lot of problem here in Sweden because, as I mentioned earlier, we don't even acknowledge, so we don't have a tool. We don't have a tool to work towards this these problems.
Yeah, just resonated with me. I think as well, prior to George Floyd, sometimes we find a lot of the nurses that come to us, because it's so terrible, they find it difficult to articulate what they're saying and connect it to the racism, because a lot of the time they're gaslighted. So even when they raise a problem at work, they're told, oh, maybe it's you're too sensitive, you've got a chip on your shoulder, but they never actually look at the possibility that it's race discrimination. So I think that's probably the problem that you have here as well, actually identifying the elements of race discrimination.
I think one of the big things is, I know within the NHS, is actually acknowledging that racism actually exists. And if that's not acknowledged, you're fighting a losing battle. And for someone like in the profession for about 30 years as a nurse, midwife for 22 years, and we know, looking at the recent reports, that Black women are 4 times likely to die in pregnancy, and South Asian women are 2 times more likely to die. Now, those stats are just not acceptable, especially when our NHS is one of the sort of leading healthcare models in the world. So what's going on? And we know that it's not because it's purely because of the colour of their skin. They're not getting the care that they should get. You get treated because of the colour of your skin. And in my sort of experience, I've set up a platform, and it's the Association of South Asian Midwives, because there's so much sort of stereotypes, so much misinformation that is out there regarding our communities, and there's not enough representation either. We have a huge demographic of South Asians, but yet within the nursing and the midwifery profession, they're just, we don't correspond with those numbers. And, one of the things is people will ask, well, why aren't they coming into the profession? Well, for many, maybe they hear the ones who are in the profession of the issues that they face, the racism that they face, the poor career prospects. So why should they come in? Why should you come into a profession when you're going to be confronted with racism? So, our platform is very much to go out to the communities and be role models, because yes, there are people out there, there is good stuff going on. Obviously with post-COVID now, because we have a voice, because this is now being sort of put forward, and we are sort of carrying that agenda forward. Things are changing very slowly, but we have to keep pounding, because if we stop, if we don't let the momentum carry on, it will stop it being put back at the bottom of the pile.
So we have to set the context. We know that racism is not going away soon. We know that. And we know that this issue of racism and race discrimination is a societal issue. We see that because we have increased right-sided politics. So we know that it's a societal issue. And we know also that the things that block the changes for race equality is around privilege of certain groups. So I think going back to some of the George Floyd issue, that gives us a unique time in history that we haven't seen for a long time around the discourse around race equality. And I remember on the anniversary of his death, which I would never see before, that lots of people were taking the knee. So remember the basketball player that took the knee? Lots of people were taking the knee in real solidarity with the race equality movement. I've never seen that before. So there are small pockets of change and movements, but we need a lot more. We need those voices to be amplified, like Naomi and Avisa and Zainab has said. We need to be amplified. I think some of the issues is around when people lift their voices, they need to know that they're protected and that they are safe. As I said earlier, there's a cost. So some of us, both black and brown people and white people, need to be able to be speaking up for each other and be in solidarity for each other as well. So I see my position within my organisation and nationally, because I'm in I chair a national group for black minority ethnic nurses. My position is to be an agitator. I am not there to be comfortable when you see the race inequalities and the race discrimination. My job is to be an agitator, an articulate agitator who can put some arguments through because we see the data. So in England, if you look at the career progression of black and brown nurses, the higher up you go in terms of grading, the less representation you have. We measure that every year. It's called the Workforce Race Equality Standard. And then if you look at the surveys for patients and staff, you will see that race discrimination is becoming worse and worse from patients, actually, and members of the public. Yeah. So we see those increasing trends. So we have a specific time now for us to really try and do some really concrete things. I mean, we've talked about acknowledging the racism issue, and there is something also about not being a bystander and actually tackling some of those behaviours head on. And we are coming through COVID, and we have lots of research. People asking us, tell us about your experience as a black and brown person during the COVID. Well, we've told you many times. Okay, we've had survey upon survey and survey. So actually, you've researched it, you've got the data. Okay, what's next? Okay, and so what we're looking for is action and impact. That's really where it counts, and it takes a lot of people. So we need to be courageous. Okay, we really need to be courageous about this thing and have each other's backs. So we've been nursing for 30 years plus. We need to leave a legacy for the generation to come. I don't think they're going to be as tolerant as, and I don't think we're tolerant, but I think they will have less of a threshold than we do. Okay.
But in relation to Sweden now, do you think that is there the same momentum in Sweden, or do we lack organization? Do we lack a bigger acknowledgement of the racial? Is there a momentum in Sweden, would you say, or do we lack the infrastructure, organizational?
I think both yes and no. I mean, we have seen over the last couple of years that things have happened. There was I can't remember how long ago, that doctors organized and actually wrote something together speaking up against racism in healthcare, which had never happened before. So there are things bubbling, so to say, under the surface, but we are very spread out. We're working in different areas of the field and we need to kind of come together and find each other and organize in a way to also support each other to say.
Maybe that's when you get the global and international.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's very inspiring to hear how you are working with these issues. And I think, I mean, there are little platforms here and there, but we could definitely do more. And I think over time we're going to have to, because just like in the UK here, also the right wing is gaining more and more power, and healthcare definitely needs to be able to continue having a focus on treating patients, not discriminating patients. So we really need to organize and work towards the same cause.
Okay, I think maybe we will ask someone else if people have questions or comments or share experience. I can continue asking, but I guess no. Yes, I bring the mic.
I would like to thanks for the amazing organization, amazing work you guys are doing. And I wonder if it has been like any kind of trans union or trans syndicate cooperation. For example, I have a dream of working on a project here in Sweden where we point out common questions of discrimination as I work as an immigrant Black woman in a mainly dominated branch. Every time I have a conflict, it's pointed out as a personal conflict. And as you can point it out, that's a conflict that happens through ethnicity, age, social class, then you break them. But you need a lawyer. Here in Sweden, the new political party, it's now the new most powerful political party. It's about to break out the discrimination law that was already very weak. It wasn't specific enough to bring it out as race. How could you work that question? Is it possible to work the question in the UK? Have you been working the question in that sense? Because in Brazil, just a second question is signed the same. In Brazil, we have turned a Brazilian, and in Brazil, it has happened that we turned unions of Black people cross business, like nurses, business, technology, everything, but just Black people, and all the money earned with those discrimination questions, because in Brazil, racism is actually a crime. All the money earned for that was used to found the first medical Black university, for example. And that money is being reinjected. And I got goosebumps when I think about that idea. And I bring it so much to see happening in other countries. So I would like to give that to you guys and hear how could that be possible?
Well, okay, so that's so I'll give you some thoughts and reflections and then hand that over to my colleagues. So in the United Kingdom, if you talk from a union perspective, they don't handle race or race discrimination very well at all. So I think we need to say that they don't. And what we have though are other grassroots organisations and community groups that push that agenda in a much more effective way. And we have specific organisations that specialise in race equality and diversity. So they tend to push that agenda. And then obviously there are other groups and organisations within healthcare that push that agenda, but it's notoriously difficult. Just this week, the Chief Nursing Officer, in conjunction with, we have the National Health Service, there's a confederation, and then the nursing midwifery regulators have just produced their anti-racist strategy. So that was just launched 2 days ago, which is like a toolkit around how we handle racism. So it's a toolkit. The proof will be in the impact that has for healthcare workers in their lived and worked and their work experience. That's the proof of the measure, the impact of that. But at least it's a tool, and there is a real call and drive now at the moment to use the language of being an anti-racist, because then it's explicit and you're articulating. It's not about diversity, it's not about this and that. It's about race, equality, and being an anti-racist. So you anti-discriminate. So we need to use more of that language so everybody's very clear about what we mean, about what is meant. I think your question then around the money used by some of the unions is turned into a college. I think we probably need to look to America, because I think they've got a much more proven history of doing that. You don't find that in the United Kingdom, but we do have legislation. So we have the Race Equality Act, we have the Discrimination Act. They are laid down by Parliament and by law. So we have that. That should help people to hold discriminators to account. But it's very difficult, even when you talk about employment tribunals, to prove racist behaviour. It's still quite notoriously difficult, but we have had some success, but it's limited.
So I work alongside Naomi for Equality for Black Nurses. So Naomi's obviously set that up now 2 years. We have a social media account, we have internet, we do blogs, and then we meet every Tuesday on Zoom. And we're getting more and more nurses now, and midwives, healthcare workers. They're moving forward because now they know that it is racism. We need to call it out as it is, not tap dance, not tiptoe around the word. It is racism, and it is what it is. And for so long, people have got away with doing what they've done. And it's like what Felicia said, we are getting less and less tolerant. I've only been nursing 15 years, and I have absolutely zero tolerance for it. But it's taken me a long time to get to that stage. And we are seeing more overseas nurses. They're not recognizing that it's racism, but they know something's not right. They just can't put their finger on it, and then they come to us. We're assessing cases. We've seen nurses that have been arrested in the middle of the night on, accusations that are just of no substance. They've lost their jobs. They've been sacked on the spot. And these are the times where we have, gone for their employers, and some of their employers are just absolutely not backing down. So you have to take the fight all the way, and it can be very hard. It can be very challenging. A lot of these healthcare workers are having PTSD, stress. It's severe mental health stress. But what we do know is, one of the things I always say is, Malcolm X always said, you're not outnumbered, you're out-organised. You just need to be organised, because when you get together and you hold them to account, you suddenly see, and just in this last week in the UK, we've had a South African nurse who took, she was a freelance agency nurse. She took the organisation to court and she won because it was racism. And you're going to see more and more of these cases happening, because we even have allies. Like, we had a white nurse who went into work, and she was a children's nurse, and she walked into a place and she saw black nurses getting heavily, worked, and white nurses not. She said this is racism. She challenged, and the trust went for her. She wasn't able to work. She lost income, but the judge took one look at this and said, this is racism. What she said was valid. And you're going to see a lot more of this, because people are not tolerating it.
I wanted to ask you about the Swedish Union, but I guess it's like a depressing answer. There is no.
No, I don't know. Sadly, no.
We will gladly join. We do have an organization called Afrosvenskarnas Riksförbund, which they are focusing on for brown and black people, for equality, not only in the healthcare in general, for equality, and they talk a lot about what their work, not talk the work towards inclusivity, representation, racism, and they. But unfortunately, the United Nations was here a couple of days ago, and they had a press release, and we need to collect data. We don't have that in Sweden. So I can talk every day about racism, but we need to show the effects
of the racism. And so we need to start there in Sweden, because we keep, we don't even acknowledge. So how can we work towards equality and safe, for a safe place for us? Because as a Black and brown people here in Sweden, it's not safe. It's not always safe to work in the hospital or whatever. Even we have the brutality, not in the same like in America when it comes to police brutality, but there is a profile even here in Sweden. So we do have problems. We do have problems here. We just need our governments to acknowledge it. Yeah, so we can. There's a lot of people that work like they have a platforms, but we need to have the government, from the government, not activists doing that in their free time every day.
But that's how you stop. That might be how you stop. So,
I gotta say that I wrote my thesis on Afro-Swedish women as experience with midwives, and the reason why I chose this topic is because of the racism that I not experienced towards myself, but towards patients in healthcare. And I figured if I get to hear it, not being a white person, what is said when I'm not in the room. So I wanted to highlight that, and there's very little research in Sweden looking at this, especially when it comes to healthcare. We see that women born in Africa, south of Sahara, because we don't have the race in discrimination law or anything. Race is not there. We have ethnicity. And so women born south of Sahara have a worse outcome when it comes to pregnancy and childbirth. It's more risk here in Sweden as well. We don't have as high numbers or as impactful, but we see that there's a difference. And the report that comes from Socialstyrelsen, which is like our health organization, a national one, it never highlighted why it is like this in that report. It just says this is how it is, and even when we have removed socioeconomic factors, this still remains, and that's where we are right now. So we have a lot of work to do to highlight these things.
I just want to add that when we talk about equality or people are getting affected by racism in Sweden, that you just mentioned, it's more, the studies are more about the educational background, the social background, but the language skills. But you can be a doctor, Black doctor, and also be affected by racism. We had a doctor a few years ago, a Black doctor, that died because of racism, because they didn't believe that he had a stroke, and they didn't believe him. So he died. So when they say that, it's about the language, the education, no, we have racism is based on color. People are dying because of the color of their skin. But we need to also talk about, you mentioned the mental health. Like when you're exposed to racism every day, what happens to your body? We know there are studies that people, Black and brown people, are more getting problems with the health. So the effects are 15, 16, or 20 years forward. So we have to talk about the mental issues too when exposed of daily racism.
I think the first thing that people need to do here is be aware of the website, because the website is an organizing tool, not just something to look at. So it's nursingnarratives.com. On the website, there's the Antirasistiskt NHS Manifesto. So every organization here should get onto the website and sign in solidarity. That's the first practical thing that can happen. I think in the Swedish context, so we're here in a film festival, yeah? Many of us believe in the power of the image, and we have people here who are saying, we need our image put forward. So who here is going to step forward and do the work? you know, it's thank you for clapping, but who's going to do it? It has to be done. Because if you don't do it, you're colluding in this. And that's the history of the UK and the history of the United States. That's the first thing to say in the Swedish context. And of course, we can come and do it, but why should we? We have our own work to do in the UK. There are people here, and you can do it. It's not that difficult. I missed a session this morning about film as a weapon. Yes, film is a weapon. You watch it, it can mobilize. But the process of making a film, the organizing of making a film, organizes and radicalizes everybody involved. And so if you start doing that here, you will get that radicalization and people will start coming forward. We don't know how many people are out there who are suffering and who don't know who to speak to. How do you reach them? You reach them through media. So that's one strong suggestion I would make for here. The other thing, of course, is that we have to, you know, capitalism doesn't recognize borders unless it wants to create migrants, okay? And we don't recognize borders either in terms of international solidarity. So certainly moving forward on this issue, there is going to be more work together and we'll continue that. And, you know, I make a pledge to do that now, here today. But the other thing that we need to be aware of is internationalism is one of the most powerful forces that we have as workers, as ordinary people, as activists, whatever, okay? And we saw in the 60s what happened when there was an international movement. So in other work, probably some people are aware of Ultraviolence, a film that we showed last year around police killings, yeah? There are police killings in Brazil, there are police killings in Palestine, there are police killings everywhere. So what we're going to do with that issue is we're going to have a People's Tribunal on police killings and put the UK government on trial, okay, for murder, manslaughter, and not just the police officers. And this is something for the Swedish context as well. It's not just the people that use the violence, it's the people who tell them to use it. It's the people who give them excuses. It's the government ministers and it's the prime ministers. And I'm a bit more pessimistic. I don't call these governments that are emerging right-wing, I call them fascistic. Yeah, that's the language they're using. When the UK uses language of invasion, that's war terminology. They're declaring war on migrants and they're declaring war on everybody who supports them. So we're in a very serious situation. But I agree with everything the speakers have said, particularly around local organizing, national organizing, international organizing. But more than that, we can see all around us that young people are sick to death of what the older generation have done, and they have absolutely failed. The generation of the 90s have failed the youth, and I think what's coming through in terms of Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, environmentalism, is all these things are emerging. And the reason we have fascism growing in power is because they can see what's coming. It's not because they want to control the situation. They know what's coming. So we have to keep pushing and organizing and putting our hope in the young people.
I think we have time for 2 more questions, perhaps. So maybe we take them together and then we will.
I'm not that young anymore, but yeah, I'm still becoming a nurse. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I'm thinking about that, what you said also, Nandi, about the thing that we are not too many. I mean, in a way, I see what you mean, but in another way, I also think that, I mean, we are like 3 or 4 like black people or like black or brown people at every ward, and I'm thinking of like when I see you, I don't see people that is like having the image of like someone that is stereotypically someone Black Lives Matter or whatever. It's like everyday people, like we are everyday people, all of us. So I'm thinking like, what is your like best tips to like get people to get involved? Like when you say that you're the agitator, I mean that is so inspiring because like, yeah, behind these doctors and nursing clothes, we are like, yeah, really great activists.
So, you know, none of this is easy, but you have to find like-minded people, and sometimes it just may start with a small amount, and then that builds, and you have to be intentional, and you have to be unified it's really important that you do that. So I'll give you an example. During especially the first wave of the pandemic, and we knew that lots of Black and brown nurses were dying. We engaged, my group, the group I chair, we knew that this was coming out. And our group is probably about 250, okay? But there's small pockets of people. So we said we can't meet with them because it was a lockdown. So we arranged engagement events across the whole of England. And actually people outside of England came with us. So we managed to reach out to thousands of nurses and midwives. And this is just an example about how it might start small. What they were telling us is, you know, the masks, the FFP3 masks, they didn't fit them very well, especially some of our Asian colleagues, because you've got different facial features. So that FFP3 mask is modelled around a white male. So if you put it on a person who doesn't have the same features, it won't fit. If your FFP3 mask doesn't fit, your exposure to the viral load is higher and you may become ill or die. So we gathered that information very quickly, raised that with the chief nursing officer of the country. Then we got a call from the deputy chief nurse and said, what's this we're hearing? We told her, and then they did a pilot, did measurements and all kinds of things, and then they redesigned those masks. We had 6 brand new masks. So that's from intelligence from the ground floor, okay? So that's just an example of how you galvanize people. So there was about 8 of us in the group at the time, and we needed to think fast on our feet to respond to the call. But there are other ways you can do that, you know, networks. Everybody, you know, sometimes it doesn't have to be a big formal group. You can apply pressure through networking and knowing where the power is also within your organization. And aligning yourself to that sometimes. So there's no reason why, if you're a student nurse, if you want to go and have a chat with your chief executive, there's no reason why you can't send an email or a letter to have a conversation. Then you get the eye and the ear of that person, and you start to have a place of influence. Okay, so that's, you know, many of us here standing here, we're here because we carry wounds. We've had to go into battle. Okay, sometimes those battles are really small, sometimes they need to be big. So, you know, we're here, so you can network with us, okay? We're hoping that we're going to build some ties, you know? Yeah, we will, okay. So that's, you know, so you can start small, okay? But, you know, start talking, start articulating, have a vision, okay? And the vision could be simple as, we want Black and brown nurses to be able to speak up without the fear of reprisal. It could be that we want the board to pay attention to what we're saying. You can start small, okay? But it's the networking.
Just quickly to add to that, when you send that email, copy in Equality for Black Nurses, and any other organisations, the organisation you mentioned, because if you come as an individual, they'll ignore you. But if they see, okay,
who am I sending it to? You said?
To whoever you want to send it to.
Okay, like the boss or like...
Well,
yeah.
If you want to call him the boss, call him the boss. I wouldn't call him that, but yeah, to whoever you want to send it to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have 2 more questions, and then...
Yeah, I'd just like to agree with what you said about how difficult it is to evidence discrimination. As a union rep, I had a few cases where it was in the background somehow, but there's just no way to prove it. It becomes very quickly like a personal conflict issue, and it becomes very individualized. But what they really would find it more difficult to argue against is like data that shows how many Black nurses are stuck on level 4, band 4, for like 20 years. How many healthcare assistants who are Black are stuck on band 2 and they don't get to progress to band 3, and compare that to white healthcare assistants and nurses. And on a trust level, I mean, they have that data, do you know what I mean? I don't know whether like that's kind of publicly available or whether you need to do a freedom of information request or whatever, but just embarrassing the trust with like those statistics. I mean, you can't argue with that. That is structural racism, isn't it? And it's also something to kind of build a campaign around, like at work.
So the data is publicly available, so you can easily go to the NHS website and then you look at the work workforce, race equality. And then you can actually see the data, and it's always interesting. Band 5, lots. Band 6, okay. Band 7, dropped. And this is clinical and non-clinical. And every year they are released, and it's always interesting because it's the lip service, but actions. So I'm going to be very quick. In my example, I was working towards going band 7. I had all the qualifications. I sat with meetings over a year, 3 times. CC doing the chief nurse last time, and it was, oh wait, you've got to be patient. So handed that notice in and blasted them publicly, and suddenly they started scrambling and they sat up. And this would definitely have not happened if I was a white person, because you could see the white counterparts who hadn't had half the training in half the knowledge, hadn't trained up other people, hadn't had all that input, from senior consultants to senior nurses. There's a lot of things you want to do to make sure you do your job. But so that data is publicly available, and they see it every year. And then you get the top 10 performing trusts, and then you get the top 10 worst performing trusts. And every year it's there. It's like normally around October, November, I believe.
Yeah, I wanted to expand a little bit about how to start organizing. I think I would like to ask this from a different angle. Like, I have at my workplace a lot of say racialized people as me, but the brainwashing kind of is so horrendous in that sense that sometimes you see that people are in denial, right? And the system is in denial. The management is in denial. Like, even bringing up the point is difficult. Just saying it loud is difficult. And sometimes my question is, how do you bring other racialized people on your side of this conflict? And how do you start doing that?
I think the best thing to do is actually find the commonality with individuals. So, for example, even before the Black Lives Movement, I, as an agency nurse, sometimes I would know that I'm being treated differently, and I might just have kind of, I might just have a little small conversation with somebody, and straight away they go they show you that it's because of our colour. So it's almost like even before COVID began, a lot of Black nurses, we had codes, and I think once you find a commonality, you can then expand on it and just talking about it. Because even when I set up Equality for Black Nurses, it was because we was talking about we was talking about things that were affecting us, and again, when you think about the structural and the systemic racism, it's insidious. It's not easy to see it, but we could feel it, and I think with that, it's like a slippery snake, really, when you think about racism. But only one set of people can see that snake. And every time you look at it, it goes away. So it's really, but once you can get somebody that's on the same kind of, that they understand it, and then you start talking about it, and then more of you start talking about it, and then you start creating a little network. And those people, the more you expose it and the more you speak, you become stronger.
Just a point. There is something about people of colour, migrants, ethnic people. You need to know your history. It's really important. You need to know your history and to educate yourselves. So when you get sometimes our community together and they may not be thinking on the same line which you've said, there's something about how you educate each other. You need to educate yourself on colonialism, okay? How the repression of masses and people of colour, how historically how that came about, how even the mythology about bone density, even the mythology about different jaws, even the mythology around racial being, race is a social construct. It started from, Darwinism times, when they made judgments based on no physiological evidence that Black people were different to white people, and the labeling started. It starts from centuries ago, and you need to educate yourself and you need to educate others, because actually as you educate people, the truth comes out, and then you're able to move with a bit more freedom. So it's not easy, it's challenging, like you said, but there needs to be that commonality of thought and understanding the principles of repression and the whole purpose of race and discrimination.
So I know I didn't say anything at the beginning. I can't stop talking, but sometimes you have to go through the back door. And what I mean by that is that, you know, there are situations and some people are uncomfortable with this discussion, and I see what you mean. Now, maybe you can start a book club and read Fanon, and then get to a discussion about because if people don't start straight away, yeah, you take them in slowly, but then you don't spend too much time taking them in slowly. Once you got them, then you just go fast, yeah, because some people need to be coaxed in.
I just wanted to say something. It's like those of us black and brown people, we are sometimes ashamed of who we are. So you hide or you assimilate your host people, you know, the white people or whatever. But you need to be your authentic self. You need to show them who you are, because if you don't show them the real you, how are they going to know about you and understand the nuances, how you dress, what you eat? You know, a lot of us, and I'm sure you'll agree, that, you know, we sort of, it's that imposter syndrome, or it's becoming like the host system. You know, you're ashamed of who you are. So I would say you have to be your authentic self, because people won't know, you know, who we are, our history and everything, and just talk about it. You know, go out there in your, you know, in your national outfit. So what? You know, don't hide.
Okay, so this is an international struggle, I guess, because borders are more like a capitalist invention. So we will thank the panel for...
Yes, I can speak loud. Thank the panel and all the work, and if people want to talk, now we've been standing here, so we're getting tired. But you are still here, so if people want to talk, they just come forward and organize, and we will, thank you everyone, and thank you panel and the documentary, and we keep organizing them. So, thanks.